All right. Welcome back to Pod Logic presented by Straight Up Podcasts. I am your host, Johnny Peterson. And today I want to talk about the minimum viable podcast. Now, what might that be? You've heard of minimum viable product, but probably not minimum viable podcast. So when it comes to the concept of creating podcasts, you would expect when you speak to a professional that they would say things along the lines of you need to have great audio quality. You need to have consistent content releases. You need to entertain, inform, or distract your listeners and try to give even more value through detailed show notes. So the thing that people don't think about is that no one ever said anything about not being allowed into podcasting without those things that I just mentioned. And while the concepts like really clean audio quality and the things that go into that, like production, editing, mixing, and mastering, while those are critical to take your podcast to the next level, what if you aren't able to financially or from a bandwidth standpoint take advantage of those tools that are available to you from someone like myself? What if you are just someone that has a small business, you have a small personal brand, you just want to start a podcast essentially for the minimum amount of cost and the minimum amount of effort? Obviously, when you think of things like no effort, people kind of equate that with being bad. I don't think that that's necessarily true. Ultimately, a lot of people just don't have time to go out and find an editor or learn how to edit themselves or learn how to produce audio themselves. They just want to get their message out there through podcasting. And this is this barrier that's sort of being in front of them. And what the minimum viable podcast is to sort of break that barrier and show people how they can create a good quality sounding podcast with, again, low cost, low effort. So ultimately why I'm making this episode is I think it's really critical to get this information out to people because, like I said, you really don't need the fancy bells and whistles in your podcast for it to be considered valuable or viable. So I'm going to get into the 10 steps that I've written out on how to start your minimum viable podcast. Let's start with number 1. You're going to go buy a USB microphone, preferably the Samsung Q2U. It's like $50 to $80 on Amazon. And if you're on a Mac, you're going to need something like this, a USB to USB-C, in order to be able to plug it into your laptop or your computer. Number 2, you're going to actually plug that microphone into your laptop or computer through the USB cable, and you're going to download something called Audacity. Audacity is a DAW, which is what audio producers use to mix, master, edit, and record podcasts. You are just going to be using it to record. That is the best way to get the audio. You just want to capture the audio somewhere, and you're going to use Audacity to use it because it's free and it's easy to use. And there's a guide in the description below on how to set up your microphone and record. Number 3, you're going to record in your car in a parking lot that's preferably quiet. You can do that either early in the morning or late at night. You're going to keep your windows up. You're going to keep your AC off. You're going to speak at a conversational level, and you're going to minimize the amount that the microphone moves in your hand while keeping it about a fist away from your face. So that is going to ensure that you get the best possible audio quality. I've recorded several podcasts in my car in order to test this theory, and it works out really, really well. I think that it definitely beats recording from your closet because you minimize that echo that you would normally get in your closet. Even if you're hanging up a bunch of stuff in there like sweatshirts or sound panels, the car is the best way to do it, and it's not going to cost you anything. Number 4, let's get into the actual content of what you're talking about. You're going to introduce yourself and what your podcast is about in under 15 seconds. And then you're going to describe what this specific episode is going to be about before diving into the actual content. You're also going to state your call to action, which is, hey, I want you to subscribe. Hey, I want you to share this episode with somebody. That's going to be your call to action. So let's talk about number 5. And before I get into number 5, I have to go on a little bit of a tangent because one of the main reasons someone would bring on someone like myself to edit, mix, and master a podcast is not only because of the ability that we have to make it sound really good, but also editing out those mistakes, crutch words, like that stuff, long pauses, mistakes, things where you look up, you say, I shouldn't have said that. I'm going to edit it out, or I want that edited out. So how, as someone that isn't going to outsource any of the editing, you don't have the time to do it yourself, how does someone like you avoid those as much as possible. The first step is, well, this is the fifth step out of 10, but the first step within that fifth step is to understand that you are going to make mistakes and you have to be okay with that. You can't expect to not say or like once, especially if this is your first time ever speaking into a microphone to record a podcast. It's just going to happen. Be okay with it. But there are things that we can do to avoid it now and in the future. So you can avoid these crutch words by actually slowing down the pace of your speech. It gives you more time to think. It gives you an opportunity to collect your thoughts as you're speaking so you don't give out these long, awkward pauses that would normally be filled with crutch words like and like. Secondly, I think you should have a pre-written outline of what you're going to talk about. That way you can keep yourself on schedule, keep yourself on pace, and you don't sort of just get lost because there's the voice crack. You don't sort of get lost because you're trying to just remember all of this in your head, or you're trying to go off the dome in terms of spitting out all of this content. And ultimately what that leads into is that you have to have an immense knowledge of what you're talking about. And I feel like that this is a given, but I want to mention it because if you're starting a podcast about a topic and you aren't an expert on said topic, I don't know what you're doing. You're not going to know what you're talking about, and the people aren't going to listen to you because it'll be pretty obvious that you don't know what you're talking about. So having immense knowledge on your subject matter is really important, and ultimately speak at a normal conversational level. There's no need to yell. Don't whisper. The microphone will do its job. You just speak directly into it. Number 6, when you've finished, you're going to export your audio as an MP3 file, and there is a guide below on how to do that in Audacity. Number 7, you're going to create an account on Anchor. Why Anchor? Because it's free and it allows you to create your own cover art within that platform for free. Again, we're talking minimum viable podcast. Number 8, give your podcast a name, and you can check around Apple Podcasts and Spotify in order to make sure that no one else has the same name as yours. And if they do, too bad. You got to pick another name for your podcast. And then write a short description about your show, who you are, the value that you're offering through your podcast, and then links to your website, business, whatever it is that you're trying to plug, have that in there as well. Number 9, upload your episode, give it a little title, write a short description about what this episode is about. And then I want you to put in any relevant links to things that are important that you talked about, whether that's books, podcasts, people, websites, anything that you mention, hyperlink that in the show notes. You want to give people as much valuable as possible. And the only thing that requires from you is the time to actually put those links in there for people. Also link your website, yourself, obviously, and your call to action, whatever that's going to be. Hey, subscribe. Hey, go follow me on Twitter. Hey, check out our newsletter, whatever it's going to be. And then finally, schedule your episode to publish either right away or on a given date in the future. The best way to keep yourself accountable for doing this podcast is to pick a day of the week, month, quarter, whatever it is that you are going to release new content. And that is the way that you turn this into a habit, is by molding it into your schedule. And the best way to do that is to just set a solid date that repeats, again, weekly, monthly, quarterly, as to when you're actually going to release. The easiest way to make this a habit and to keep consistent your content releases is by picking that day. And then finally, this is a disclaimer. This is the minimum viable podcast. I didn't say it was going to sound pretty. It's going to sound just okay. I didn't say it was going to look amazing. It's going to look novice. But ultimately, you're getting your knowledge out there at the best quality possible for the circumstances that you're in. And I think that this is the best way to do it, from my opinion. If you have any other thoughts, or you have ways that you think you would do it better, please let me know. I'm more than willing to alter this minimum viable podcast list. But again, this is really all about having fun. Podcasting is supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be entertaining people, informing them, distracting them. Just focus on that. Follow these 10 steps and you will have the minimum viable podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in. I really appreciate it. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing. Or if you know somebody who you think would enjoy it too, maybe they're starting a minimum viable podcast, go ahead and share that with them. I would really appreciate it. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week and an even better weekend. I'll see you on Monday for the newsletter and Wednesday for the podcast.